Welcome back to Intro to the Financial Services Industry. Now we're talking about fixed income products. This is part 4. Again, the usual disclaimer. So we're going to talk about fixed income products. In this section, we're talking about municipal bonds. So municipal bond products are also called munis, right? And they aren't necessarily issued by a municipality. They could be issued by the state of North Carolina, the state of California. They could be issued by a county. They could be issued by a city. But they're called municipal products, municipal bonds. And what they are is they're bond products where a municipality or a state or a county or a government authority, a local authority, wants to raise capital for some project, for some events, for some need, right? So they want to fund some capital event requirement, right? Municipal bonds are nice because they're exempt from federal taxes in most cases, and from most state and local taxes, especially if you live in the state where they're issued. Now, please don't send me 50 emails and text pointing out that there are cases where they're not tax exempt, but in many cases, they are exempt. And that's one of the things that makes them attractive. Now, I put this one here. This was an old municipal bond for the city of Syracuse. And why do cities do this stuff, right? Well, maybe the city of Syracuse was going to, I don't know, do some city project, build a bridge in the downtown city or something. So they need to raise capital for something, some project, and they're going to pay it off on a municipal bond. Again, states can issue municipal bonds also. Here's one for the state of Missouri. And basically, they're in many ways very good securities products. Now, what are they used for? Well, they could be used to well, let's say you lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey. They might issue a bond to improve the port facilities because there's a large port in there. Or they're used to build bridges or tunnels or highways or possibly to fund schools. There was a bond issue in the community I live in today where they wanted to float a bond issue because they wanted to raise money to build a new police station and fire station, and they wanted to buy more fire trucks. That was a municipal bond. They're going to float a bond from the municipality and use that money to do some projects. So there's lots of projects they can do. Typically, they're tied to, municipal level, the voters get to vote, do they want to take this on? Because anytime you have a municipal bond, it's going to raise taxes, whether that's to work on highways, or maybe it's to build new parks. Let's say you live in a city and your city wants to attract an NFL team, National Football League, and the city is going to, or the state, or the city or the state or the county are going to help subsidize the construction of a new stadium to attract an NFL team or a baseball team. Well, they might issue bonds to raise the money to help build the stadium. Those are all examples. There's lots of examples where states, municipalities, or local authorities, like the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, or the a tunnel authority, or a highway authority, or a Massachusetts turnpike, or Pennsylvania turnpike. There's lots of cases where states, municipalities want to borrow money to raise funds for capital projects. So one example I'm going to give you here, and I did this for my friends in Boston, is this is a case where there was a bond issue. It was one of the most expensive bond issues ever issued in Massachusetts. It was for something called the Big Dig. So if you look at the left-hand picture, you'll see what downtown Boston looked like around 1990. And on the right-hand side, you see what it looks like today. And what they did was they basically knocked down the highway that was ugly and traffic-ridden and kind of miserable to drive on. And they buried it, built a tunnel. And on top, there's a beautiful park. So on the right, you see what it looks like today, where the highway is invisible. It's underground. It's a tunnel underneath the city. And there's no longer no overhead roads. It's all right now just a beautiful parkway. They also increased the tunnels and built better, added an extra tunnel, built a tunnel between Boston and the East Boston, take it to Logan Airport. That was called the Big Dig. So that sort of very large multi-billion-dollar project could only be funded publicly if there was a bond issue. You borrow the money, you have a bond issue, and then the government pays off the investors using tax dollars. So again, it's the tax dollars that goes back. Now they can also use fees and surcharges. The government can use fees and surcharges to pay off bond issues, but the most common one is taxes. This is a bond here too. This is a Pacific Railroad bond issued by the city and county of San Francisco in 1865, where the city wanted to do railroad improvements to make a bond. They wanted to improve the transportation capabilities of the city of San Francisco, so they issued a bond. What I like about this bond, to show you as an example, is at the bottom you can actually see the coupons. Now, another type of bond, this is not a municipal bond, is what's called sovereign debt, foreign sovereign debt. So in the previous video, we talked about government debt, US governments. In sovereign debt, we're talking about sovereign governments of other countries. So not the US government. Now, in this case, I have a bond here that's a 30-year Japanese government bond. So sovereign debt, sovereign bonds are bonds issued by national governments other than the United States. And it's the same thing as the US Treasury bonds. They're debt products issued by a sovereign government for the purpose of operating the government, whatever reason the government has to operate. Sovereign debt is generally considered a little riskier because it's only as good as the government that issues it, right? The more stable the government, the lower the risk. Now, I like this bond. This is a sovereign debt. This is a sovereign debt, good example of sovereign debt. It was issued by the Russian government. And what I really like with this example is, if you look on the right side, you can still see the coupons are attached. So it still has the coupons. Now, each coupon pays $27. Now you might say to yourself, why, if this was issued by the Russian government, is it in dollars and not rubles? And why is it all in English? That's because this bond, at the time it was sold by the Russian government, they were selling these bonds in England and the United States, which are obviously wealthier countries. So they were a place to borrow money. So the Russian government, the Imperial Russian government, was selling these bonds. And what you would do is, when each of the dates came along, you would clip it off, take it down, and you would get $27 for each coupon. Now, if you look at the dates on the bond, you'll see there's December 1921, there's June 1921, there's December 1920, and there's June 1920, and there's December 1919. And there would have been a June 1919 coupon and others. But you'll notice several of the coupons have been clipped off and cashed in. So that means that in June, for example, of 1919, and December of 1918, and June 1918, and December 1917, and June of 1917, somebody cut those coupons off, took it down, and they received their interest payment for $27. So somebody put up $1,000 and they clipped the coupons and they collected $27. Okay, but you'll notice that the coupons stopped being clipped and stopped getting paid at December of 1919. Why? Well, the reason is because July 1918, the Tsar and his family were executed, and the communists took control in Russia. And when the communists took control of Russia, the first thing they did was they stopped paying the bonds and debt obligations of the previous government. Now, this is really interesting. This was a very communist concept. So when a communist swooped into power someplace, what they would do is they would stop paying the debt obligations of the previous government. Because in the idea of the worker paradise, you don't pay for capital, you don't have capitalist tools. And a bond is definitely a capitalist tool. But what's happened over the years is where there have been revolutions in countries, especially in South America, Latin America, when there's been revolutions, the new people coming in after they win the revolution, they find that if they refuse to pay the bonds of the debt obligations of the previous government, they find that nobody will lend them money. So often you'll see that when there's a revolution in countries, sometimes the new government coming in won't just tear up the bonds and the debt obligations of the previous government. They'll continue to pay them off because they want to keep their credit good so they can borrow money. But the point I was making here is sovereign debt can be risky depending upon the government in power. If you had bought Russian bonds, Russian government bonds in 1917, 1918, you lost that money. You didn't get it paid. Another example of where it's a good example is this is a Confederate States of the United States of America bond for $100. So somebody during the Civil War, the Confederate States, the Confederacy sold bonds. And when they lost the war, these bonds became worthless. The United States was not going to pay these off because it was the states were in revolt. They didn't recognize the legitimacy of them, and these coupons wouldn't have been paid. So someone who invested in Confederate bonds would have been paid nothing. So point is, with sovereign debt, foreign governments, non-U.S. government bonds, they can be higher risk depending upon the stability of the government. If the government is highly secure, highly stable, British government, for example, would be probably a pretty good investment. But the government of certain other Latin American or other countries of the world could be a little bit more volatile, a little bit more risky. All right, so that's sovereign debt. And the other we're going to move on to, we're going to talk a little bit is collateralized debt obligations, which we talked about earlier. And these are structured financial products that pool together cash flow generating assets and repackage them as asset pools for discrete tranches that can be sold to investors. A collateralized debt obligation, or CDO, is a so-called because it pools assets such as mortgages, bonds, and loans. They're essentially debt obligations that serve collateral. All right, so the best example of these I would give you is pools. And I'll go back to I mentioned earlier is mortgages. So what you can do is somebody could take up and they could buy up mortgages, mortgages in one spot, mortgages in another spot, and they can pull them all together and take all those mortgages and package them together and create a security for them. And there's lots of ways they can do them. They can create a security that only contains the principals from the mortgages, or they can create a security that contains the principal and the interest payments, or they can take a security and just strip out the interest payments. There's lots of things creative they can do here. But the idea is the collateral, the security, are the mortgages, they can pool them together and sell them. So what they'll often do is they might take similar mortgages, and what to do to limit the risk, they're gonna take mortgages from different parts of the country. Certain number of mortgages in Texas, and some in Maine, and some in New Hampshire, and some in Wisconsin, and some in Minnesota, and some in Oregon, and California, and manage them to pool so that when they bring them together, they lower their risk by having lots of different mortgages pulled together into a pool. So mortgage-backed securities, and there's three types of mortgage-backed securities we're talking about here. Fannie Mae's, which are the Federal National Mortgage Association, Freddie Mac's, Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation, and Ginnie Mae's. So they basically pull these together, package them as mortgage products, package them with these government organizations or government-owned organizations, government-associated organizations, and they package them together as mortgage products and then sell them. Now, as I think you guys recall, in 2008, we had a bit of a meltdown in this country over these same type of products. They were oversold, and I'm not going to go into that in detail, but it was that's a presentation in and of itself. They don't have to be mortgages. Collateralized debt obligations could be, as I mentioned earlier, I've seen products put together from car loans and mobile home loans, and I think credit card loans too. They do too. But somebody takes these different pieces of debt, pulls them together, packages them into a pool, and then sells them to investors. Okay, that concludes our discussion on fixed income products. I know it was a 4-part series. I broke it up. I tried to make it less boring. If you have any questions, please email me at the address below. And with that, I hope you'll move on to our next video.